Welcome to Healthy Kidneys After 60. I am your host, Jane Pauley. Today, we are not just talking about health, we are talking about independence, the freedom to walk, and the quiet fears that often visit us in the early morning hours when our legs don't feel as steady as they once did. We are honored to have a man who has dedicated over 50 years to understanding the aging body, someone who treats his patients like family, Dr. Sanjay Gupta. Sanjay, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you, Jane. It is a privilege to be here. You know, as I was walking into the studio today, I saw many people enjoying the park nearby, and it reminded me why I do this. Every person deserves to keep that simple joy of movement. I have seen thousands of patients struggle, but I have also seen the incredible resilience of the human body when it is given what it truly needs. I am looking forward to sharing these stories and some very simple truths that I believe can change the lives of many people listening today, especially those who feel that their best days of walking are behind them.
Sanjay, I want to start with a moment that I think many of our listeners over 60 know all too well, though they might not talk about it at the dinner table. It is that first moment of the day when the alarm goes off or the sun peeks through the curtains and you swing your legs over the side of the bed. For many, there is this sudden, unsettling realization that the legs feel heavy, almost like lead, or perhaps there is a slight tremor, a lack of that firm foundation we took for granted in our 30s. It feels as if during those 8 hours of sleep, something was stolen from us. Why is it that after a night of supposed rest, our legs often feel at their weakest? And is this just an inevitable tax we pay for the years we have lived? Or is there something more clinical, something happening beneath the skin while we dream that explains this morning frailty?
That is a profound way to put it, Jane, and you are touching on a reality that millions of seniors wake up to every single day. When you describe it as something being stolen, you are actually not far from the biological truth. In the medical world, we look at the night as a long period of fasting. And for a body over 60, that fasting period is much more taxing than it is for a younger person. We enter what is called a catabolic state. To put it simply, while you are sleeping and not consuming any fuel, your body still needs energy to keep your heart beating and your lungs moving. Because the aging metabolism is less efficient at storing energy, it begins to look for fuel elsewhere. And unfortunately, it often finds it by breaking down your muscle tissue, particularly in the large muscle groups like your thighs and calves. It is almost as if the body is eating itself to keep the lights on. This is why you feel that heaviness or weakness the moment you stand up. Your muscles have literally been diminished overnight. The National Institute on Aging has conducted extensive research on this, and the data is quite startling. They found that for individuals in our age group, the rate of muscle loss accelerates significantly during these long gaps between meals. If you don't break that fast with the exact right nutrients, you aren't just starting your day on empty. You are starting it with a deficit that your legs feel immediately. I have sat with so many people who tell me they feel like they are walking on eggshells for the first hour of the day, terrified that their knees might just give way. It is a heavy emotional burden to carry before you have even had your first cup of coffee.
It sounds like a silent crisis happening in the dark, and it is frightening to think that our own bodies are forced to make that kind of trade-off just to stay alive through the night. When you talk about the body eating its own muscle, it makes me wonder about the long-term cost of those mornings where we just ignore the weakness and push through. Many of us were raised with this idea of grin and bear it, so we stumble to the kitchen, perhaps feeling that familiar wobble, and we just hope it goes away. But if this catabolic state is happening every single night, are we reaching a point of no return where the damage to our mobility becomes permanent? Is there a way to actually interrupt this process? Or are we simply watching a slow erosion of our ability to stand tall and walk with confidence as we age?
You have hit on the most critical question, Jane. The grin and bear it attitude is admirable, but when it comes to muscle biology, it can be a dangerous trap. If we don't intervene, this erosion isn't just a morning nuisance. It becomes a condition we call sarcopenia, which is the clinical term for age-related muscle wasting. Once you lose a certain percentage of that muscle mass, your balance shifts, your gait changes, and your risk of a life-altering fall skyrockets. But here is the piece of hope I want everyone to hold on to. It is absolutely avoidable. Science shows us that while we cannot stop time, we can change the chemistry of our mornings. The reason I am so passionate about the first meal of the day is that it serves as the stop button for that catabolic destruction. When you provide the body with specific proteins and minerals the moment you wake up, you send a chemical signal that says, stop breaking down the muscle, we have fuel now. We have seen in clinical settings that by simply adjusting what goes into that first bowl or onto that first plate, we can see an almost immediate improvement in leg stability. It is about moving from a state of survival during the night to a state of rebuilding in the morning. I often tell my patients that their breakfast isn't just food, it is the construction material for the bridge that will carry them through the rest of the day. If the bridge is weak, the journey is dangerous, but if we build it right, that feeling of leaden legs can actually start to fade. And that is not just a theory, it is something we see happen when people finally understand the biological why behind their morning weakness.
There is a specific kind of silence that happens in the homes of many seniors during those early morning hours. A silence born out of a very private and deep-seated fear that we rarely discuss with our adult children or even our doctors because we don't want to seem fragile. It is that moment when you realize you are no longer walking freely across the room, but rather you are navigating from one piece of furniture to the next, using the back of a chair or the edge of a hallway table as a lifeline. Many of our listeners have shared that they feel a sense of dread when they have to use the restroom at 6 a.m. because their legs feel like they don't belong to them anymore, as if the connection between the brain and the feet has become frayed. Sanjay, when we talk about this loss of confidence in our own balance, it isn't just a physical issue. It is a psychological prison that starts to shrink a person's world. And I wonder if you have encountered someone who reached that breaking point where the fear of a fall became more paralyzing than the physical weakness itself.
You have captured that feeling perfectly, Jane, that furniture surfing as some call it, and it is a heartbreaking stage of life to witness because it signals a loss of independence. I remember vividly a gentleman I worked with named Tom Wilson, who is 69 years old and lives out in Denver, Colorado, a place where people love to be active and outdoors. Tom was a man who had spent his life hiking those mountain trails, but when he came to see me, he was a shadow of his former self because of exactly what you described. He told me about a Tuesday morning that changed everything for him. He had woken up, felt that familiar morning wobbliness, and tried to reach for his glasses on the nightstand, but his legs simply buckled. He didn't fall hard that time, he just kind of slumped to the floor, but the realization that his foundation was gone terrified him so much that he stopped leaving his house. He was terrified of the steps leading down from his front porch, convinced that one wrong twitch in his calves would send him tumbling. This fear is so common among the elderly because we know that a single fall can be the beginning of a very steep decline. And for Tom, it meant he stopped seeing his friends and stopped going to the grocery store. He told me he felt like a prisoner in a house he had built with his own hands, all because his legs felt like jelly every time the sun came up.
It is devastating to hear about someone like Tom, who was once so vibrant, now feeling trapped by his own front porch steps. And it makes me think about how many people are listening right now who are doing that exact same calculation every morning. They wonder if today is the day their legs finally give out, and that calculation must create an enormous amount of stress that only makes the physical weakness worse. When you see a patient like Tom, who has essentially retreated from life because he can no longer trust his own body to stand upright, how do you begin to convince them that this isn't just the end of the road? Is there a specific moment in the morning, perhaps during that first interaction with food or movement, where the downward spiral can be halted before it leads to a catastrophic injury on those very stairs he was so afraid of?
It always starts with acknowledging that the fear is rational but not inevitable, Jane. And with Tom, we had to look at his morning routine as the primary source of his vulnerability. He was doing what many people do. He would wake up, feel weak, and then wait for hours to eat anything substantial, thinking he was just getting started slowly. I explained to him that by waiting until 10 or 11 a.m. to provide his muscles with any protein or electrolytes, he was essentially leaving his legs completely unarmed for the most dangerous part of his day. In Denver, the air is thin and the mornings are brisk, which actually requires more metabolic energy, and Tom was running on fumes while trying to navigate stairs. The high point of our work together was when I showed him that his wobble wasn't a permanent brain defect or a sign of old age, but a sign of acute morning starvation of the muscle fibers. We began to implement a very specific nutritional intervention right at dawn, and I remember the look on his face a few weeks later when he realized he could stand at the sink to brush his teeth without having to lock his knees or lean his hip against the counter. That return of trust in one's own limbs is like a second lease on life, and it proved to him that his legs hadn't retired. They were just waiting for the right tools to get back to work.
We have been told for decades that a light breakfast is the gold standard for health, especially as we get older and our activity levels might decrease. Many of us grew up thinking that a simple piece of white toast with a bit of jam and a steaming cup of black coffee was the perfect way to start the day without feeling weighed down. It feels refined, it feels disciplined, and it seems like the healthy choice compared to the heavy, greasy breakfasts of our youth. But you are suggesting something quite revolutionary and perhaps a bit disturbing for those of us set in our ways, that these very habits, these polite breakfasts we have come to rely on, might actually be the silent culprits behind our weakening frames. Is it possible that the very food we think is keeping us trim is actually starving the muscles that keep us upright? And what does the science from places like Harvard tell us about the hidden cost of a breakfast that lacks the real building blocks of life?
It is one of the most persistent and damaging myths in modern nutrition, Jane, and it is a conversation I have to have almost every single day. That light breakfast of toast and coffee is essentially a recipe for muscle disaster for anyone over 60. You see, white bread is a simple carbohydrate that causes a rapid spike in blood sugar followed by a devastating crash, but more importantly, it provides 0 amino acids. Coffee is a diuretic which can flush out the very minerals like potassium and magnesium that your muscles need to contract properly. Harvard researchers have pointed out that after age 60, we can lose up to 1/3 of our leg muscle mass if we don't actively protect it. And a carbohydrate-only breakfast is like trying to build a brick wall with nothing but a bit of straw. When you eat just toast, your body looks at that sugar and says, where is the protein? And when it doesn't find any in the stomach, it goes right back to the leg muscles to scavenge what it needs. You are literally trading your calf muscles for a momentary sugar high from a piece of bread. It is a slow, invisible theft that happens every morning, and by the time you realize your legs are thinning and your walk is slowing down, the damage is already deep.
The idea that my morning coffee and toast could be causing my body to scavenge my own leg muscles is absolutely chilling, and it makes me realize how little we actually understand about the chemistry of aging. We think we are being good by avoiding fats or heavy proteins, but it sounds like we are actually forcing our bodies into a state of emergency every single day before the clock even strikes 9. If this is the case, and if millions of seniors are inadvertently dismantling their own mobility with every bite of toast, what is the alternative that doesn't feel overwhelming? Many people are afraid that a stronger breakfast will lead to weight gain or digestive issues. So how do we bridge that gap between protecting our muscles and maintaining our overall health without falling back into unhealthy, heavy habits?
The key is shifting our focus from calories to functionality and understanding that the aging body processes nutrients very differently than it did at 20. We don't need a massive greasy plate of bacon, but we do need high-quality bioavailable proteins and specific micronutrients that act as a shield for our muscle fibers. The research is very clear. The muscle-building response in seniors requires a higher threshold of protein to be triggered. A tiny bit won't do it. You need a focused dose. When we ignore this, we fall into a trap where we might look thin on the outside, but inside, our muscles are being replaced by fat and connective tissue, making us weak and prone to injury. This isn't about eating more, it is about eating with a purpose. I have seen the transformation in people who simply swapped that morning toast for something that actually feeds the muscle, and the change in their energy levels and leg strength is often more dramatic than any medicine I could prescribe. We have to stop thinking of breakfast as just a way to stop hunger and start seeing it as the daily maintenance required to keep our biological machine running. Because right now, many of us are trying to drive a car with no oil in the engine and wondering why it is starting to rattle.
It seems there is a profound disconnect between what we think is healthy and what our bodies actually require as we cross that threshold into our 60s and 70s. We often hear that as we age, we should eat less because our metabolism slows down. And so many seniors take this to heart by skipping meals or eating like birds, thinking they are doing their hearts and their waistlines a favor. But you are pointing to a much more complex and dangerous reality where this less is more philosophy is actually a shortcut to frailty. I am curious about the specific mistakes that are hidden in plain sight, the things we do out of habit or because of old advice that are secretly draining our strength. Is there a story of a patient who was doing everything right according to the old rules, but found themselves struggling to even stand up from a chair without help?
That is exactly the tragedy of Robert Miller, a 74-year-old man from Des Moines, Iowa, who I had the pleasure of meeting last year. Robert was a retired teacher, very disciplined, and he took great pride in his health. He told me, "Doctor, I eat so clean, I barely have any meat, I have my coffee, and I keep my weight exactly where it was in high school." But Robert was suffering from debilitating leg cramps every night, and when he tried to get out of his favorite armchair in the afternoon, he had to use both arms to heave himself up. He thought he was just getting old. But when we looked at his routine, he was making the classic mistakes. He was drinking large amounts of coffee, which depleted his potassium, and his clean breakfast was just a small bowl of fruit. While fruit is healthy, it has almost no protein and no healthy fats to slow down the absorption of sugar. His muscles were starving for electrolytes and nitrogen. He was effectively starving his legs while thinking he was the picture of health. I remember him telling me how embarrassed he felt when he couldn't stand up quickly to greet his grandchildren. He felt like his body had betrayed his disciplined lifestyle, not realizing that his discipline was actually the problem.
Robert's story is so relatable because he was acting out of a desire to stay healthy, yet he was accidentally creating the very weakness he feared. It is heartbreaking to think of a man who worked so hard to stay thin, only to find that his thinness came at the cost of his ability to stand up and hug his grandkids. This idea that we need fuel rather than just lack of calories is such a shift in perspective. When you sat down with Robert and looked at those leg cramps and that struggle to stand, how did you explain to him that his clean diet was actually a form of nutritional neglect? And for those listening who might be experiencing those same cramps or that same struggle to get out of a chair, what are the red flags in their own morning routine that they should be looking for right now?
I told Robert that his body was like a house where he was keeping the exterior painted perfectly, but letting the foundation rot away. The red flags are often subtle before they become severe. If you find yourself needing to use your arms to push off from a chair, that is a major sign that your quadriceps, the big muscles in your thighs, are losing their power. If you experience cramps in your calves at night or early in the morning, your body is screaming for minerals like magnesium and potassium that you likely missed at breakfast. For Robert, we had to dismantle the idea that eating less was the goal. I told him he needed to prioritize what I call the big three every morning: high-quality protein, healthy fats, and electrolyte-rich foods. We added things like eggs and a bit of avocado to his morning, and we cut back on the excessive coffee. The change wasn't instant, but within a few weeks, those nighttime cramps that had kept him awake and fearful simply vanished. He realized that his legs didn't need a rest, they needed a refill. It is a powerful lesson for all of us. Your body isn't a bank account where you only want to see the balance go down. It is a biological engine that needs high-octane fuel every single morning to keep the pistons moving.
There is something incredibly hopeful about the idea that we aren't just stuck with the decline we see in the mirror or feel in our joints. Often in medicine, we feel that once a certain age is reached, we are just managing symptoms rather than actually getting better. But you have mentioned that there is evidence, real scientific data from places like Tufts University, suggesting that the body has a remarkable ability to reclaim its strength even in its 7th or 8th decade. This isn't about some miracle drug or an expensive surgery, but a fundamental shift in how we break our fast. I want to go back to Tom, the man from Denver who was so afraid of his porch steps. When he finally committed to this change, what did those 8 weeks actually look like, and how did his body respond to being given the right tools after years of being neglected?
The miracle, if you want to call it that, is actually just biology finally being allowed to work correctly, Jane. With Tom Wilson in Denver, we didn't give him a gym membership or a prescription. We just changed his plate. We moved him away from his empty morning routine and onto a regimen that focused on muscle synthesis. At Tufts University, they've shown that even people in their 80s and 90s can increase their muscle strength by over 30% in just a couple of months with the right nutritional support. For Tom, the first 2 weeks were about stabilizing his blood sugar. He noticed he didn't have that mid-morning crash where he felt like he needed a nap at 10 a.m. By week 4, he told me something incredible. He was standing in his kitchen and realized he hadn't reached for the counter for support in 20 minutes. By week 8, the man who was afraid of his front porch steps was walking 2 kilometers a day around his neighborhood. He didn't just feel better. His muscle fibers had actually thickened and his nervous system was firing more efficiently. He went from a man who was preparing for a wheelchair to a man who was planning a trip to see his sister in another state.
2 kilometers a day after being afraid of a few steps, that is a staggering transformation in just 8 weeks. It almost sounds too simple to be true, and yet the science of muscle protein synthesis supports it. I think many people listening might be skeptical because they have been told for so long that old age is just old age. They might think, well, Tom was lucky, or maybe his case wasn't that bad. But when you look at the data from Tufts and other institutions, this isn't an isolated success story, is it? It is a biological blueprint that applies to almost everyone. If someone is sitting at home right now, perhaps feeling that same weakness Tom felt, how can they trust that their body still has that rebuilding switch inside of it? And what is the very first sign they should look for to know the change is working?
You are right, Jane. It isn't luck. It is a law of nature. As long as you are alive, your body is constantly breaking down and rebuilding cells. The problem is that after 60, the breaking down part gets faster and the rebuilding part gets lazier. All we are doing with a proper breakfast is waking up the rebuilding process. The first sign that it's working, and this is what Tom told me, is a sense of lightness in the legs. It sounds strange, but when your muscles are weak, every step feels like you are pulling your feet out of deep mud. When the nutrition starts to kick in, that mud disappears. You find yourself walking to the mailbox without thinking about it, or standing up from the toilet without having to plan your move. It is the return of automatic movement. Tom's story is a testament to the fact that your DNA doesn't have an expiration date for strength. We saw a 35% improvement in his leg power markers in our follow-up. That is the difference between being a spectator in your own life and being an active participant. I want everyone to know that your muscles aren't gone. They are just dormant, waiting for you to send the right chemical signal to wake them up.
We often wait until a crisis occurs, a fall, a broken hip, or a total loss of mobility, before we take our muscle health seriously. We tend to dismiss the small things, a little trouble getting out of the car, a slower pace when walking with friends, or needing to use the handrail more firmly on the stairs. We call it mellowing out or taking it easy, but you describe these not as natural parts of aging, but as early warning sirens of a condition called sarcopenia. It is a frightening word because it sounds so clinical and inevitable. I am thinking of the people who are in that in-between stage where they aren't disabled, but they aren't strong either. Is there a story of someone who was ignoring these signs until it almost cost them their independence? And how can we distinguish between normal aging and this dangerous loss of muscle?
There was a gentleman named George Anderson, an 82-year-old living in Tampa, Florida, a place where everyone is out and about. George was the classic example of someone who adjusted his life to his weakness without even realizing he was doing it. He told me he started taking the elevator for just 1 flight of stairs. He started asking his wife to open jars he used to handle easily, and he noticed his walk had become more of a shuffle than a stride. He told himself, well, I'm 82, this is what 82 looks like. But then one day he was at a park with his great-grandson, and the boy ran toward a pond. George tried to spring into action to catch him, and his legs simply didn't respond. He didn't have that explosive power anymore. He didn't fall, but the terrifying realization that he couldn't protect his own family because his legs were too slow was a wake-up call. That is sarcopenia. It isn't just about being thin, it is about the quality of the muscle. George's legs looked normal, but they were filled with marbled fat instead of dense muscle fiber. He was losing his fast twitch fibers, the ones that save you when you trip or when you need to move quickly.
That story of George in the park is so poignant because it highlights that muscle strength isn't just about us. It is about our ability to be there for the people we love. The idea that his legs didn't respond is a terrifying thought, like a car where you step on the gas and nothing happens. For those of us who might be adjusting our lives like George was, taking the elevator, walking more slowly, or leaning on things, how do we know when we have crossed the line into a medical issue? Is there a simple test or a specific moment in our daily routine that can tell us if our muscle loss is becoming a dangerous silent thief, like it was for George in Tampa?
I often tell people to look at the chair stand test. If you have to use your hands to push off the armrests of a chair to stand up, you are already showing signs of significant muscle loss. Another sign is your walking speed. If you find that people are constantly walking past you on the sidewalk, or if you can't cross a street before the light changes, your legs are sending you a distress signal. George had all of these signs, but he normalized them. Sarcopenia is dangerous because it doesn't hurt. It's not like arthritis where your joints ache. It is a silent weakening. I told George that his shuffle wasn't a sign of his age, but a sign of his muscle fibers turning off because they weren't being fed or used correctly. We worked on his morning nutrition and added very simple 3-minute movements to his day. The change in his gait was remarkable. He went from shuffling to actually picking up his feet again. We have to stop accepting weakness as a requirement of being old. It is a condition, and like many conditions, it can be treated and even reversed if you catch it before that pond moment happens.
We have talked a lot about the why and the what not to do, but I want to get very practical for our listeners who are sitting at their kitchen tables right now, perhaps looking at their cupboards and wondering what they should be reaching for tomorrow morning. You have identified 6 specific foods that you call the saviors of the aging leg. These aren't exotic or expensive supplements. They are things we can find in any grocery store, yet we often overlook them or eat them in the wrong way. When we look at research from the University of Illinois or the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, what are these powerhouse foods, and why is the combination of them so much more effective than just taking a multivitamin or a protein shake? How do these specific items work together to actually rebuild the muscle fibers we have been discussing?
This is the part I love because it is so actionable. The first and most important is the humble whole egg. For years, we were told to avoid them because of cholesterol, but for the over 60 population, the egg is the perfect protein. It contains leucine, which is the specific amino acid that acts as a key to unlock muscle growth. Without leucine, you can eat all the protein in the world and your muscles won't grow. Second is Greek yogurt, which has double the protein of regular yogurt and provides the calcium needed for nerve signals to reach your muscles. Then we have oats. Not the sugary instant kind, but steel-cut or rolled oats. They provide the slow-burning energy your legs need for balance throughout the morning. Fourth is the banana, specifically for its potassium, which prevents those dreaded cramps we talked about with Robert. Fifth is fatty fish like salmon or even sardines, which are packed with omega-3s that reduce the inflammation that eats muscle tissue. And finally, the sweet potato, which provides the complex carbohydrates and beta-carotene that help with muscle repair. When you combine these, you aren't just eating, you are sending a full construction crew to your legs.
It is fascinating to hear you break it down like that. The idea of leucine as a key and omega-3s as a shield against inflammation. It makes the grocery list feel like a pharmacy in the best possible way. But I can hear some of our listeners wondering about the how. Do we have to eat all 6 of these at once? And what about those who have digestive issues or are worried about their weight? How do we integrate these saviors into a morning routine that doesn't feel like a chore? Is there a specific way to prepare these foods or a specific order to eat them in that maximizes their impact on our leg strength according to the clinical nutrition guidelines you follow?
You don't have to eat all of them in one sitting, but you want to aim for at least 3 of them in your breakfast. For example, a bowl of oats with a sliced banana and a side of 2 boiled eggs is a perfect leg strength meal. The key is consistency. You can't do it once a week and expect your legs to feel like iron. You need that leucine from the eggs every single morning to keep that rebuilding switch in the on position. And regarding weight, these foods are actually very satiating. When you eat high-quality protein and fiber, you stop snacking on the junk later in the day. I have seen patients actually lose body fat while gaining muscle weight because their metabolism finally has the right ingredients to work with. The American Journal of Clinical Nutrition has shown that this protein pacing at breakfast is far more effective for seniors than eating a big steak at dinner. Your muscles are most hungry in the morning after that long night of fasting we discussed. Feed them then, and they will reward you with stability and strength all day long. It is a simple shift. Stop eating to satisfy your stomach and start eating to power your stride.
Food is clearly the foundation, but I suspect that what we do in those first 30 minutes after waking up, even before we pick up a fork, also plays a role in how steady we feel on our feet. We often have these ingrained habits, reaching for the phone, sitting in a recliner with the news, or rushing straight to the shower, that might be working against us. There is a sense that our bodies need a warm-up period, a way to wake up the connection between the brain and the legs. I am thinking of a patient who might have struggled with that morning stiffness and found that a few tiny, almost effortless habits made a world of difference. Who was that person, and what were those small wins that allowed them to move from a state of morning frailty to a state of morning readiness?
That brings to mind Linda Parker, a 66-year-old woman from Eugene, Oregon. Linda was someone who had always been relatively healthy, but she had fallen into a habit of intermittent fasting because she heard it was trendy. She would wake up and drink nothing but black coffee until noon. By 10 a.m., she told me her legs felt like they were made of dry wood, stiff, brittle, and unresponsive. She wasn't sick, she just felt old. We changed her morning entirely. The first thing we had her do was drink a tall glass of warm water with a tiny pinch of sea salt for minerals right when she got out of bed. Then, while her coffee was brewing, she did what I call the kitchen counter routine. Just 3 minutes of gentle calf raises and holding a tandem stand, one foot in front of the other, while holding onto the counter. Finally, she spent 5 minutes sitting by a window in the morning sun. These seem like nothing, but for Linda, they were transformative. The water rehydrated her muscle cells, the movement woke up her nervous system, and the sunlight regulated her cortisol levels.
It is so interesting that such small, almost invisible habits could change the entire trajectory of Linda's day. I think many of us underestimate the power of hydration and light, thinking they are just nice to have rather than essential for our mobility. When you told Linda to stop her fasting and start this routine, did she resist the change? And for those who feel like they don't have the energy to even do 3 minutes of exercise in the morning because their legs are so tired, how do you convince them that the movement itself is what will give them the energy rather than the other way around? It feels like a chicken and egg problem for many seniors who are exhausted before they even begin.
Linda was very resistant at first. She was convinced that her coffee was the only thing keeping her going. But I told her, Linda, your coffee is a loan that you have to pay back with interest in the form of a crash later. In the 3-minute movement isn't a workout in the traditional sense, it is a neuromuscular wake-up call. When you do a few calf raises, you are telling your brain, hey, we are going to be walking today. Start sending the signals. For someone who feels too tired to move, I say, do it while you are still lying in bed. Point and flex your toes, squeeze your glutes, just get the blood flowing. For Linda, once she saw that she didn't have that brittle feeling in her knees by mid-morning, she became a believer. She told me she felt fluid for the first time in years. These habits create a compounding interest effect. Each one builds on the other. By the time she sat down for her protein-rich breakfast, her body was already primed to absorb those nutrients. It is about creating an environment of success for your muscles before you even leave the house.
We live in an age where there is so much conflicting advice. One day a certain food is a superfood, and yes, and the next day it is something to avoid. It can be exhausting for anyone, but especially for those over 60 who just want to know the truth so they can stay independent and healthy. You have spent your career filtering out the noise and looking at the hard data, the kind of research that comes from institutions like the French Institute of Mineral Nutrition. When we look at the statistics, the 41% improvement in balance, the 50% reduction in falls, these aren't just numbers on a page. They represent thousands of people who didn't end up in a nursing home or a hospital bed. What is the gold standard conclusion from all this science? If you could boil down all these years of research into one undeniable truth for our listeners, what would that be?
The undeniable truth, Jane, is that frailty is a choice we make with our habits, not a sentence we receive from our age. The science, particularly from the French studies, shows us that the aging body is incredibly sensitive to mineral balance. They found that by simply ensuring a specific ratio of magnesium and calcium in the morning, they could reduce the sway in a person's gait by nearly half. Think about that. Half the wobbliness just from minerals. This tells us that our old age problems are often just cellular problems. The science proves that your muscles haven't forgotten how to be strong. They have just been starved of the specific chemical environment they need to function. When we look at that 50% reduction in falls, it isn't because these people became bodybuilders. It's because their muscles and nerves started communicating again. The gold standard is this: prioritize your morning nutrition and mineral intake as if your life depends on it, because your independence certainly does.
Frailty is a choice, not a sentence. That is such a powerful and challenging statement. It gives us back the agency we thought we had lost, but it also places a lot of responsibility on us to change our ways. For someone who has been living with weakness for years, it might be hard to believe that something as simple as mineral balance or a better breakfast could really result in a 50% lower chance of falling. They might feel like they have missed the boat. How do you respond to that person who feels that their muscles are too far gone for even the best science to help? Is there ever a point where it truly is too late to see these kinds of improvements in balance and strength?
In all my years, I have never seen a point where it was too late. I have seen 90-year-olds regain the ability to walk to the bathroom unaided after being bedbound. The human body is designed to survive, and it will take any help you give it and multiply it. That 50% reduction in falls isn't a miracle. It's what happens when you stop the catabolic fire and start the anabolic rebuilding. Even if you only regain 10% of your strength, that 10% could be the difference between catching yourself on a rug and breaking your hip. The science doesn't promise you will be a marathon runner, but it does promise that your foundation can be reinforced. I want people to stop looking at the calendar and start looking at their breakfast plate. That is where the science lives. That is where the 41% improvement begins. Every single morning is a new opportunity to tell your body that you aren't ready to give up yet. The data is on your side, the biology is on your side. You just have to give your body the raw materials to prove it to you.
As we wrap up this conversation, I am struck by how much of our fear of aging is actually a fear of losing our freedom. The freedom to go where we want, to play with our grandchildren, and to live in our own homes without fear. We have learned today that the theft of this freedom often starts in the quiet hours of the morning, in the way we treat our bodies during that first hour after waking. It is a small window of time, but it seems to hold the key to the rest of our lives. Dr. Gupta, you have shared so much wisdom and so many stories of hope today. As a final thought, what is the one thing you want our listeners to remember when they wake up tomorrow morning and feel that first bit of stiffness in their legs? What is the message of hope you want to leave them with as they face the years ahead?
I want them to remember that their legs have carried them through every joy and every sorrow of their lives, and they aren't ready to stop now. When you feel that stiffness tomorrow, don't listen to it as a sign of the end. Listen to it as a request. Your body is asking you for help. It is saying, I want to keep going, but I need the right fuel. Aging is a journey we all take, but it doesn't have to be a journey into darkness and dependency. By making these small changes, the eggs, the hydration, the 3 minutes of movement, you are choosing freedom. I have seen the light come back into the eyes of people like Tom, Robert, George, and Linda, not because they found a fountain of youth, but because they found their strength again. It has been a true honor to share these insights with you, Jane. Thank you for giving a voice to this vital conversation. I hope everyone listening takes that first step toward a stronger tomorrow.
Thank you, Sanjay. Your words are a powerful reminder that we have more control than we think. To our listeners, if this conversation touched you, if it gave you a bit of hope or a new idea for your morning, I encourage you to take that first step tomorrow. Start with that glass of water, rethink that piece of toast, and remember that your strength is worth fighting for. This has been Healthy Kidneys After 60. We are so grateful you joined us today. If you found this helpful, please subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our upcoming episodes where we will continue to explore how to live your best, most independent life after 60. We have so much more to share with you, and we want to be part of your journey every step of the way. Until next time, I'm Jane Pauley. Stand tall, walk with confidence, and take care of yourselves.
Goodbye, everyone, and remember, your best walk is still ahead of you. Thank you for listening.